panellists, Professor Monica Whitty, Professor J.D. Dewsbury and Dr. Noor Mustafa. They will each provide a presentation, and the conclusion will have time for questions and answers. You will see on the webinar screen there is the ability for you to submit and vote on questions as the webinar takes place, and I recommend you do that while things come fresh in your mind. So working from home has traditionally been helpful for delivering a work-life balance to the employee. However, in recent times, this forced arrangement has changed the way that we think. Many organisations and employees have not been ready for this challenge and don't fully recognise the constraints, challenges and potential benefits from this type of working arrangement. Providing meaningful work with the right infrastructure will motivate employees. However, not done properly can lead to serious organisational and human problems. So for example, I'm speaking from my home in Canberra, which is located on Ngunnawal land. I also acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands upon which each audience member is located. So to start off today's proceedings, we're going to first hear from Dr. Noor Mustafa. Dr. Mustafa is the coordinator of postgraduate cyber security discipline and lecturer in cyber security at the School of Engineering and IT at UNSW Canberra. His interests include cyber security, artificial intelligence and network security, intrusion detection, statistics models, machining and deep learning. I'll now throw to Noor.
Welcome everyone. I am Noor Mustafa, lecturer in cybersecurity at the University of New South Wales, Canberra. In this webinar, I am going to cover the technical aspects of cyber attacks and defenses with COVID-19 for safeguarding home networks and organization assets. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, many organizations have moved to work from home. It is a fully digital transformation process. When employees work from home and they link their organizations to the internet, this is a distributed workforce. Keeping the distributed workforce secure and safe against cyber attacks is a key challenge. The reason for this challenge is that the policy of bring your own device, BAID, allows individuals to use various operating systems and tools, which are different in the settings of security and privacy. As you can see in this figure, I categorize security into two types: organization-based security and home-based security. Before COVID-19, we can name it organization-based security. Organizations often provide security services and tools, training to employees with less effort to employees and high visibility of security services. After COVID-19, home-based security that should take high considerations from employees and organizations. Individuals need new cyber practices which adapt solid security to home networks. It is essential to apply a defense in-depth strategy that protects home networks and sensitive information of organizations. Any employee interacts with a home network that mainly includes the devices and the tools shown in this figure, such as Wi-Fi routers and laptops. The home network elements basically contain network and computing devices, operating systems, software, and storage. Network and computing devices, for example, phones, smart devices, and Internet of Things sensors. Operating systems, say Windows, Linux, and the Mac, as well as online business systems. Software, including websites, emails, and online conference tools. Storage involves local storage and the cloud data centers. Every element in a home network has vulnerabilities that lead to cyber attacks. The reason behind these vulnerabilities would be human error, operating system vulnerabilities, software vulnerabilities, storage vulnerabilities. Human error, this is one of the biggest cyber challenges, such as a person unintentionally downloads phishing emails for stealing personal information. Operating system vulnerabilities, including unpatched operating systems and weak passwords. Software vulnerabilities involving open services across the network and misconfigurations of antivirus and firewall. Storage vulnerabilities such as unencrypted data and no backup plan. Existing cyber attack models especially cyber kill chain, need a new adaptation to be easily understood by non-technical employees. The new adaptation should have three main stages: cyber vulnerabilities, cyber attacks, and the cyber risks, as you can see in this figure. This adaptation will require training employees on understanding and mitigating vulnerabilities, cyber attacks, and their risks. I have classified the most recent cyber attacks and their impacts into two types: COVID-19 themed cyber attacks and the zero-day attacks. As you can see in the table, COVID-19 themed cyber attacks include phishing and spear phishing, as well as scams. These types of attacks would lead to stealing personal information. Zero-day attacks, this is the new type of attacks, such as distributed denial of service attacks, video conference attacks, and ransomware attacks. Distributed denial of service attack would lead to disrupting online services, video conference, such as Zoom bombing. This happened due to injecting offensive images and hateful messages. Ransomware attacks, usually the attacker tries to encrypt the victim's resources until they pay a ransomware attack. Okay? For defending against the cyber threats, as shown in this figure, cybersecurity practices for home network should contain training employees against new cyber attacks, applying intelligent security tools, and learning security operational plans. Human training. No matter what the security tools are, employees should practically learn the impact of cyber threats and how they defend against them. Security controls, this is the defense tools. So in this case, employees should apply practical scenarios of security tools, such as virtual private network, antivirus, firewalls, and artificial intelligence-based intrusion prevention systems. Blockchain-based applications, including Ethereum, is not for securing the cryptocurrency only, but it can allow private chat messengers, crypto wallets, and Web3 browsers by the capability of end-to-end encryption. Operational security plan, it is a risk management process that helps managers to understand cyber threats and encourage their employees to train against them for protecting their home networks and organizations' assets. Actually, defenses against the cyber threats are not a technical side only. Organizations should consider corporate governance. This is a system of policies, standards, and rules that control business behaviors to offer security and privacy strategies. As you can see in this table, I demonstrate the recent cyber attacks and their defenses against COVID-19 attacks and the zero-day attacks. For example, in the COVID-19 themed cyber attacks, we can use different cyber defenses, such as two authentication factors, batched anti-phishing software, secure emails using standard protocols, such as OpenPGP. Zero-day attacks can be used, okay, for denial of service, distributed denial of service, and the security controls needs firewalls, intrusion prevention system, virtual private network, digital certification, and secure data backup. Video conference attacks needs applying strong authentication techniques and also secure video conference tools. Based on my research in this domain, I would recommend training employees on how artificial intelligence would enhance security and privacy capabilities for organizations. AI can deal with the large-scale data generated from distributed networks and interpret the complexity of hacking techniques. AI can assist in discovering and responding to current cyber threats. Here are some of my research projects with the defense and industry partners, such as machine learning-driven anomaly detection. This project is to discover new attack families, deep learning-enabled malware analysis, is to identify programs errors. AI-based privacy preservation is to protect sensitive data from the disclosure by unauthorized third party. Automated threat intelligence methods. This is to understand the complexity of attack behaviors, such as advanced persistent threats. Finally, AI has been widely used in several companies, such as Amazon. We can see today Amazon has the Amazon Cloud Security. Also, in Cisco, they have Cisco-based AI and machine learning-driven solutions for data security, physical security. IBM has also the SOC. SOC, this is the Security Operations Center to provide security tools and techniques. And we can see these days Microsoft has a new initiative. This initiative named after known cyber team, from threat intelligence to the intelligent chatbot.
Thanks very much, Noah. That was great. Some really good, interesting pieces of information there, particularly like the Wi-Fi that you were talking about, as well as the AWS part at the end. I'll just give you all a reminder that you can start posting questions on the Q&A forum, and you can also vote for them there as well. So next we're going to hear from Professor J.D. Dewsbury. So Professor Dewsbury is a professor in human geography at UNSW Canberra School of Science. His research focuses on performing nature of social life and the relationships between habit, technology and politics. Although situated in human geography, he has produced successful collaborations with architecture, performance, political theory, sociology and environmental studies. And now we're dragging him into cyber. His research has produced novel scientific approaches to community issues relevant to the institutions as diverse as the UK Environment Agency and the British Army. Over to you, JD.
So far in this webinar, we've dealt with technology and psychology as distinct realities within the cybersecurity space. However, the technological obstacles and psychological vulnerabilities associated with working from home actually share a common cure: habit. So what exactly is habit, and how might a better understanding of habitual behaviour help us to manage cybersecurity issues when working from home? The science of habit has really taken off in recent years, with books such as Charles Duhigg's The Power of Habit becoming international bestsellers. The key insight of this emerging science is that habits shape our lives far more than we realise. Habits form an integral part of our behavioural makeup because they enable us to function automatically, so that we can reduce energy expenditure through cognitive effort. Another way of saying this is that habits are the mechanisms we use to navigate our environments, and this takes place through a three-stage process known as a habit loop. The classic example is a neurological experiment with mice. Brain activity is measured as a mouse enters a maze upon the cue of the trap door opening, to then encounter the sensation of the smell of a piece of cheese, which it then hunts down. At first, the mouse might take around a minute to reach the cheese, with brain activity recorded as high. At the 100th attempt, the mouse reaches the cheese in less than 5 seconds, with little brain activity registered. First, there is the cue, a signal in our environment that prompts the brain to go into automatic mode to achieve a desired outcome. Second, the routine itself, where acquired habits allow us to function without thinking. And third, a reward that either strengthens or diminishes the habit for future use. The important point for thinking about cyber hygiene in the age of COVID-19 is that we need to create new kinds of habit loops to support responsible employee behaviour in the absence of familiar workspace cues and rewards. What we need to recognise, though, is that habits are not just in your head. Rather, they take shape in the relationship between you and your environment. What are some of the key obstacles to the adoption of productive and safe work habits at home? First off, developing your new cues is key. The obvious cue here is the space-time environment as you transition into work. Traditionally, this was the much maligned, but now perhaps sorely missed, daily commute. Social science theories of habit highlight how habit acquisition isn't something that happens instantaneously as we move from one space to another. it is a slow burn, sometimes uncomfortable process of adaptation and interaction with the different environments we inhabit. Employers and workers need to accept that there will be startup costs to putting these new habits in place. Namely, when do you start work at home? How do you delineate the timing of work activity? And what workplace environment do you have to make the transition to work clear, both to yourself and to your fellow home occupants? We're equally now faced with different distractions. Offices were designed with productive work in mind. Our homes aren't. Working at home, we find an array of competing demands on our attention, from the needs of your family, to the noise of traffic, to the temptation to watch another episode on Netflix. These constant distractions are where we are likely to see the lapses in attention that might open security vulnerabilities. Equally, we are now using personal devices. Working from home often means using our own personal computers and devices that we're habituated to use in a different way to the technologies we have at work. Now, some employees might find working on a confidential document while at the same time have their computer downloading delivery time updates from Coles. These personal devices cue non-work habits and behaviours that can also be the source then of potential lapses in security. Finally, a key difference between work and home is the lack of cultural reinforcements. Good habits are a collective achievement, relying on conscious and unconscious imitation, symbolic reminders and cues, and peer support that are often absent when working at home. Rather than rejecting these obstacles, new theories of habit urge us to acknowledge this difference and work with it towards the production of new habit loops that install new productive and secure routines by cues embedded in your working environment. So as the habit is acquired, the need to rethink directly upon the requirements necessary for the action to take place in producing new habits dissipates. We need to work on how, in the process of repeating the habit loops of cue, routine, reward, a habitual action emerges wired into our bodies for future enactment, enabling the body then to do the thinking for us in ways which see any sense of intentional, thoughtful thinking recede. Having a background in performance studies and theatre, as well as human geography, I see these cues, routines and rewards in terms of props, sets and performance. And this is where, going forward, we'll look at how, in terms of cues, you can learn how to understand the role that the material props of your working environment play upon how you do produce productive and secure cyber behaviours. Second, we'll look at how you can learn over time the repetition of being in the setting installs these productive and secure working habits. And finally, we'll show you how to develop daily end games that replace the satisfaction of going home at the end of the day to embed the new habits by signing off on your performance for that day.
Thanks very much, JD. I think the habits part of that is very, very interesting and something I would like to tease out more in our questions and answers. Finally, we're going to hear from Professor Monica Whitty. Professor Whitty is a Director of Research Cyber at UNSW Canberra, where she also holds a chair in Human Factors in Cybersecurity. She's a cyber psychologist who has led many large interdisciplinary projects in cybersecurity and defence. The work examines the human factors in cybersecurity, including effective cybersecurity training, end-user decision-making, online security risks, behaviours in cyberspace and insider threats. Over to you, Professor Whitty.
Hello, my name is Monica Whitty. I'm a professor in human factors in cybersecurity at the University of New South Wales, Canberra. And I'm also the Director of Research for Cyber at the university. What I'd like to talk to you today is about the human factors in cybersecurity. So rather than just think about the technical issues that need to be changed now that employees have moved to work at home, I'd like you to understand also the psychological factors that they are currently under and why those are important if we are to develop effective cybersecurity strategies. I'd like to share my screen with you now and go through a few issues. Firstly, I'd like to talk to you about the idea of humans being the weakest link. This is often a myth bantered around. Humans, in fact, are not the weakest link. Instead, we need to understand the psychology of human beings and understand, given that, what are the best ways to support people to be effective in terms of cybersecurity and improving their cyber hygiene. Right now, employees have moved to work at home, or at least a lot of them have, and they did it very suddenly as well. Now, workplaces were mindful of cybersecurity issues, but they perhaps haven't properly equipped their workforce with how to actually be really good at cyber hygiene right now at home. In order to do that effectively, I'd like to suggest that we need to think about the psychological state of your employees. Now, psychologists would define a whole lot of stresses that when individuals are under, we might be concerned about them. If you look down the list here, you'll see issues like death, divorce, loss of a job, starting a new job, finances, getting married, moving, chronic illness or injury, interpersonal conflict, taking care of an elderly or sick family member. Now, you might find that your employees are going through more than one of these types of stresses, and that would be a concern in itself. There are also common work-related stresses we might be considering. Being unhappy in the job, having a heavy workload, that might be particularly the case now. Working long hours, again, that might be another issue. And you can go through that list there. And so understanding those stresses are important, and perhaps alleviating some of those stresses so that people can work effectively. And when they do, then we might be able to train them in terms of the effective cybersecurity strategies. We also need to know that when people are under stress, they go through a certain amount of behavioural changes. They may be sleep deprived. They may have experienced burnout, a lack of concentration, increased aggression, withdrawal, intrusive thoughts, and alcohol consumption may be on the increase. We also know that domestic violence has been on the increase as well right now, with people all consumed at home. Now, we also are aware that when people are working from home, they're working under very different conditions. They're working with kids at home. They might be doing homeschooling. Husbands and wives are together. There's a lot of people trying to share the same space and trying to get on with their lives in as normal way as possible. So does that mean people can't cope? Well, I'd like to suggest they can cope. And psychologists have a bunch of theories to talk about how do we get coping to happen effectively. And we can do this in cybersecurity as well. We might think about problem-focused coping, that is things that we can do to change the situation, and emotion-focused coping, how do we provide the support, the emotional support when people are under stress. What might you do to support your employees? Just thinking about this in terms of a cybersecurity problem. Well, you might want to manage expectations. How much productivity do you want? And how much security do you want? Where do you get the balance right between that? Because when we up all our security, we decrease productivity. Having to use VPNs, for instance, might slow things down as an example. You might provide social support for your employees. That might be thinking about your tech team and how they communicate with your employees. How might they provide support? Might they use social networking types of apps? Might they use other types of methods? Right now, people are reaching out to talk to people. They're missing, they're craving that face-to-face interaction that they're accustomed to having and that they need for support. So how might we achieve this even through cybersecurity? We might need to think about working hours as well and expectations from others, and where are the limits in terms of how much email and videos, conferences that people need to actually take on board. Now, I'd also like to talk about how we actually learn things. So we need to understand the psychological state of our employees, but we also need to understand how do people learn. Now, in cybersecurity, often these learning models that have been tried and tested in all sorts of areas in psychology have been ignored. And often it's the thinking about raising awareness that they think will solve the problem. Well, I'm here to argue that's not the case, that we've got good learning models and we should draw upon those models. For example, when people learn, they need declarative knowledge. That means they need direct advice. They need to be explained, why do things happen? Why do we need to do things? We need to also think about procedural knowledge. What are the steps involved in our daily practice, or what some people might refer to as habits? We also need to think about repetition. You can't just learn it once and think you've got it. You go through it over and over it and over again. People need to have incentives to do this too. They need to be motivated. Why am I doing this? What is the point? Nudge techniques might also be useful, gradually getting people to take things on board rather than all of a sudden trying to do everything at once. And as we've talked about, people are under stress at the moment. That means that cognitive load they're under is quite heavy. So therefore, I would like to suggest under these times when we learn, we need to learn in small chunks. And so understanding these methods will understand how to actually engage your employees to improve their cybersecurity practices. I'd like to draw one example at the moment. At the moment, we know that there's a lot more phish and scams out there, especially around the COVID-19. People are working from home, they're using technology an awful lot more. That can be a great thing, but then they can be exposed to more scams. And also they may not have the filtering that they're used to having in the office. So they're under more risks. And with phish, we know that people might click on a link and download malware onto their computer, which might steal identity. They might actually think that they're giving money to something that's genuine. They might be supporting each other. That might be a scam. Or they might go to a site that they think is a genuine government site and log in details that criminals steal. So these are important things for us to consider about employees at the moment. So what do we need to do to think about these things and improve on it? Obviously, in this time, I can't give all of that to you, but I would like to give you a few suggestions. One of the things I'd like to say is obviously there's technical things that we might be able to do, and Noor has already talked about some of those things in terms of cybersecurity, but there might be things that we can do to equip humans as well. Now, raising awareness might be important to some extent because it helps people be primed to know that these things are out there. But what I'd also like to say that just raising awareness doesn't work. A lot of organisations have done that, thinking we tell people about scams and therefore they should be okay. Well, they're not okay. And one of the reasons they're not okay is they're really hard to identify, right? And so we need to think about not just helping people recognise these, but actually developing methods to take their time and actually deal with content that might be risky content. So we need to educate the end user about the consequences of clicking on a phish, giving money to a scam. We need to think about what are the scripts, the social scripts we want people to engage with when they actually use technology. So that when we develop a social script, we rehearse it and it becomes part of our normal way of life. And so when it comes to phish, I like to suggest that one of the things we might think about with email, for instance, is how we actually deal with email. Should we deal with it every time it pops up? I suggest not. I suggest dealing with that in chunks of time, and that with emails that aren't certain who the sender is, we might put that in a box to look at later, or we might send that back to the technical team to have a look at. So these are ideas to think about in terms of how you might actually prevent this particular problem. And there are many other issues that we could go through in our Prof Ed course to think about how we might help your employees be more protective at home now that they're working away from the office. So I'd like to thank you for your time and attention, and hopefully you will join us in other learnings about this. Our centre does a lot of teaching and research around cybersecurity, and we do take a very multidisciplinary approach. So thank you very much for your time.
Perfect. Thank you, Monica. That was great. I can tell you one thing I've learned through this when it comes to forming relationships with people online is the concept of the Swedish fika. Except my coffee and cake is not nearly as good as what they have in Sweden. So now we're going to throw to the question and the answers. And we've got some great questions and answers, and I encourage everyone out there to throw some more in and vote for those. So we'll start off, and they're not going to be in particular order, but Noor, I'm going to go to you first with the top question. If I use my organisation's VPN, do I need to worry about my own home security?
Thanks, Nigel, for this great question. Yes, I mean, VPN just provide end-to-end encryption. And this is just not the full protection that you can achieve to your organization. Why? Because VPN can be exploited using crypto attacks, such as man-in-the-middle attacks. And your organization need to apply a defense in-depth strategy. What I mean by defense in-depth strategy? Defense in-depth strategy means you need to provide different layers of security, such as VPN at the beginning, then using malware analysis, intrusion prevention systems, firewall systems. By adding different layers of security, you can achieve high levels of protection to your organization.
Perfect. Thank you. The next question I'm going to go through, JD, we might throw to you next, and that's a good question on habits. What can I, as a manager, do to ensure my team are coping and forming good habits that are appropriate for them and for our team?
It is a good question, and I think it brings together actually the three talks. In a sense, when you look at the vulnerabilities in your assessment that Noor's outlined, and you align that with security plans, you're then looking to marry that with the ways in which people at home will pick up these, new good behaviours. And that links to the aspects that Monica was talking about in terms of, how we must be aware about the behavioural change of this transition. It happened very rapidly. It's still an uncertain future, and things are changing. So the key thing then it would be to actually trust and set up some of those cues, routines, rewards at home. And one of the effective things I think for managers to do, and echoing what Monica said, was to do something short and sharp and quick, and that might be to kind of enroll, early online meetings at a regular basis to begin with, that gets people into their workplace at a regular time, and then at the same time, then you start to perhaps roll out some of it's going to be different from organisation to organisation about what the kind of uses of computer programming will be at home. But you might then look, okay, that's a vulnerability assessment area that we need to be aware of. We have a security plan, so I want to make sure that, that my staff are, signing on in the appropriate way, and that can be enrolled in that first kind of starting point. That then gets a routine going, and so on and so forth. But there's a myriad ways in which you can, depending on organisation, and that's something that we would look at in the Prof Ed course, the kinds of kind of habit loops that we would engender. I will just bring up another point that someone brought up in the Q&As about the difficulty of getting people to engage with these things, and that training to engage with computers, because quite a few people are perhaps not as familiar with these computer systems. Habit's the key here. You install this in the machine mechanism. You rely on and getting people to trust the AI that Noor talked about. So there's a lot to be said about how quickly you can enroll habits in your team.
Perfect. Thanks, JD. That's all good stuff. Monica, you're next in the queue. The question for you: what effective tools can one use to ensure resiliency in the personal information system environment, especially at this time when we are constantly online?
Okay, well, I'll answer this as a psychologist. And from looking at this in a psychological perspective, when we're looking at resilience, we can also look at human resilience, right? But we also need to understand that everyone has got different lives right now at home. So rather than talking about tools, looking about our employees and where their resilience might come from, and also balancing those individual differences. Some of us have kids at home and we're trying to do homeschooling. We're dealing with their unpredictable lives right now. And so within all that, how do we actually deal with building up that resilience? So I'm suggesting that we can actually train them in little chunks of time, right? Because we understand that people are grabbing for time here and there right now, wherever they can get it. And so developing that resilience means teaching people gradually and working within whatever strengths they might have, but understanding everyone's going to have a different life right now. And actually one script for all, I really don't think is going to work. We have to understand women especially are doing a lot more of the homeschooling, the cooking probably as well, while having full-time jobs. So understanding those individual lives, I think, are really important if we're actually going to get this training and helping develop resilience correct.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I actually think resilience is the key word there. And we often talk about protecting an organisation or protecting a network or protecting a person. And to me, protection is just a point in time, whereas resilience is more longitudinal and something you can aim to be better at each day, rather than I am protected or not protected, being a one or the other. So, JD, when we look at resilience and where does that flow into habits?
They're a good point. That there are key points that develop as your team adapts to working at home, and that's what I think organisations need to monitor. You need to have a kind of plan that tracks over the first week, the next month, 2 months, to make sure that you do install resilience such that routines are beginning to work. And I think that there's going to be, again, I would say, you do need to do this. You do need to catch up with staff around some key moments that they've had uncertainties, some key moments where, as Monica has said, there's been hit points in their new daily routines of all the things that they have to do. And you need to be able to show that that's something that a lot of people are going through, and that then you can revisit those over a regular basis. And slowly but surely that then means that because the thing about habit is you do things without being aware of it, and you can get into bad habits. And I would say when you're starting off with the cognitive load that Monica talked about, there are going to be quite a few bad habits to begin with. But as we go on, the resilience is precisely ensuring that your teams have the right kind of reminders, and not to kind of catastrophize things, but to be positive about them. And lace in perhaps some of those, as I say, those daily interactions to begin with. You can wean off that and then have some more kind of team building meetings, but are actually picking up on some of these resilient issues.
Can I add a little bit more to that, Nigel? I think those are really excellent points, JD. And I guess one of the other things we forget is that when we cope in life and when we are resilient, one of the normal things we do is we are in face-to-face contact with individuals. Social support is a really important part of emotional coping, right? And right now, that's why people are struggling, because the normal natural mechanism, which we know and love, to be around people, to give people a hug when we need a hug, to be able to just download when we've had a hard day, we're having to do this through online systems, which aren't necessarily so easy. It's not natural for us. And I think people are going to really enjoy being amongst others when they get to. And of course, every time there's a break and people think, I can get to the beach now in Australia, they all try to get to the beach and be amongst others. And so I think that's something also employees really need to be mindful. How do we actually inject the personal in people's lives? So when I was suggesting even our tech teams could have more, social support kind of systems open where they can chat to people, work through things. And they need to understand people will just want to talk to them about their everyday lives as well and do things a little bit differently. I think that's also what we need to be mindful of. Things aren't as natural as we're used to, and we're not equipped for that in the normal way. So how do we compensate for that online?
Yeah, no, some really good points, and you're right. How do we compensate? So we'll tease that out a bit more in a second. I'll go back to Noor now with a question that's posted. Noor, this is your one. I have read that workplaces that lock down their network instead of adequately training them to work safely within the network are taking the wrong approach to security. Do you think that is true? You can start, Noor, and then I'm going to go through each of the other panelists with.
Yep, I think this is not the right way. We need to provide security services to, your network. We don't need to lock down the network. This means if you lock down your network, this you will not, do, like freelancing work, and you will not, use new tools. So the important stuff here for people just to consider the security perspectives from providing the CIA triad for your network, like how to secure your network under the confidentiality and the integrity and the availability. So once we open our network and after that provide the security to the network, this means we need to trust our data. And also, for example, if you just use cloud service just for sharing the data. So once you apply like encryption models and just encrypt the data over the network, this means you already protected your data. And in the same time, you need also to provide like security applications, like sometimes we use we use VPN. Also in the same time, we need to use like secure protocols for the emails. It is not only one side. But for my understanding, to lock down your network, this is not the right approach.
Thanks, Nora. And JD, I'll throw to you and also throw in the additional question we've got here, which is in concert with this. How often should we be training our staff in cyber attack e-safety training?
Yeah, I agree with Nora, and that answers the first question. And I think also then it's about trusting and believing in the kind of changes that you can make when you orchestrate them, and to have an effective, still productive workforce. And so then in terms of how often, I think that one thing I would just state here is that we do really think about the way you do things by habit, because we underestimate it. And I think we also underestimate how profound it is in putting in the effort to train yourself to do things differently. And we've never had, perhaps in our lifetime, a situation where the freedoms and our everyday behaviours have changed so profoundly. And it's a space where we can be very disoriented, but it's actually a space where actually we can really see how these day-by-day routines we just don't think about. And so it's actually something, my point would be more, it really depends on your organisation, but really and truly think about how profound habit is. It seems banal, but think about how you don't think about what's going on when you drive a car, or those that are really good at swimming or cycling. What on earth are you doing when you push out from under the water and you go, you manage your breathing? If you think about it, you'll be worse at it. And I think if you start to think about all those kind of ways, new behaviours right now are crucial. So you need to do it often. You really need to feel the profound way in which you can change behaviour by simple things of routine. I'll give one quick example and then sign off. Is one of the work I did with the British Army was about how they think space faster. It was a very analogue, basic thing. They would walk 6 meters by 6 meters by 6 meters by 6 meters in a kind of square. And they kept on doing it. And the point was that they would actually feel what 6 meters distance was. And over time, they were able to maneuver their bodies and act that way very quickly without thinking. It's a very simple example, but has profound effects, especially you can imagine the scenarios when they need to be able to think space faster.
Great example. Thank you. Monica, I'll give same theme, our next ranked question. Should I be doing something each day to make sure I'm being cyber aware? Leads into our resiliency discussion.
Oh, yeah, good question. Yes, so being cyber aware or behavioural change is what I would probably say as well. There was one of the questions was asked, is yearly training enough, right? And I would argue absolutely not. What we need to do is we do need to get better at the technology, like Noor has already said. I think that's really important, that the user is not the enemy. We need to provide the good security to help them. And where the security fails in terms of the technology, what we need to do is help people understand why they're doing these things. So not just get them to do things like VPN. Ask my husband, why is he VPNing? He's told to do it. He doesn't know why he's doing it. But actually, when I explain it to him, he thinks, right, okay, well then I'll do that. So doing a little multiple choice test, once a year for people, it's really not working. We need to teach in little chunks, get people involved, get people interested in this, and help them understand why am I doing this, and then get them to do the habits that they might need to do, where they can do it. So it's about strengthening the technology and helping people, but by using psychological models to actually teach people effectively.
Great. No, I think that's very, very wise words. I like that the little bite-sized chunks goes to, similar to what JD said about training 6 metres by 6 metres, doing little bits and repetitive. So next question for everyone, I'm going to start with Noor, and I would have been disappointed if this didn't come up. In fact, if this didn't come up, I would have asked it anyway. And that is about, well, it says here the Tracking Act. Of course, it's the Tracing Act, and that's part of the issue about, is it tracking, is it tracing? So Noor, to you, what do you think about the government's proposal to have a COVID-19, I'm just going to say app?
I mean, the government proposal for the COVID-19?
The app I'm referring to. What does it? The question is, what does this mean for privacy, especially for my kids? The tracing app.
I think so. I think what we need to, just to see, like for the privacy of the COVID-19. These days we found a lot of information around the COVID-19, and this information sometimes, like correct information, and sometimes are not correct. So in this case, we need just to consider the correct information and make sure this information are populated correctly to people. How we can do this? We just need to increase the awareness and share the correct information based on the organizations. For example, in UNSW, we have PERT. And in PERT, they share with us, like the actual information with people. And in this case, we can just learn what is going on about the COVID-19. And this also will be very important to consider the cases. Sometimes people doesn't like to share about the cases of the COVID-19. And this is very important to consider about privacy. What I mean here, we can find some positive cases, and people just doesn't need to share the positive cases with others. And of course, this is very important to offer the privacy for people. But government try to find like what to collect more information about that. And I expect the government proposal here, it is a very good app. Why? Very good app to track the people. And here I'm too optimistic about that. Like COVID-19, by tracking the cases, this should be very important. Why? Because this it will just reduce this the spreading of the virus. And also, I don't find any problem related to the privacy much. Especially for the kids. Why? Because we just provide more security to our kids.
No, I totally agree. Great thoughts. JD, what's your thoughts on the Tracing Act from your perspective?
I mean, I'm not an expert on these on the privacy issues, nor on perhaps the sort of spatial epidemiology of COVID, but I have downloaded it. I am using it. I think the point about it being different from is a tracing. And I think it probably is, from what we can see elsewhere, it's a vital tool. I believe it's the data is going through Amazon, isn't it? And so there are broader things there about the ability to delete the information, and it is just a tracing app. So I'm not an expert, but I think it's a good thing, and I've got it.
Yep, no, me too. Monica, thoughts?
Yeah. You know what, I'm going to answer this in a different way. When COVID-19 happened, none of us understood it medically, right? Nor did our politicians. Now, why can't we approach the cyber security app in a similar way that governments have done, where they've got the security expert being asked the questions together with the, our leaders, saying we would like you to use it for these particular reasons. If we want people to change behaviour, and this is what we've been talking about here, one thing you need to do is trust, right? There is a little bit of a lack of trust sometimes for the government, I'm afraid to say, but one way to deal with that is actually getting an expert in to be able to answer those questions. That really, really worked well, I think, in this country, where you had a person really talking about their expertise in the medical world. Now, the other thing too is that we find that people are more likely to comply with the behaviour if we think this is a good app to have, for instance, when we share the same social identity, right? So there are theories in psychology that say we will all move together if we share the same purpose, right? So if we say to ourselves, as Australians, we care about other Australians, we don't want them to get ill, and that's why we did our social isolation very quickly and smoothly. We did it very effectively in this country because we cared about our fellow citizens. If we can bring that up, if this app is safe, then perhaps then we will get that changing. And yeah, I've downloaded it too for those particular reasons. But I would like to see government and security experts talking together on this.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with that more. We need a concerted approach. We need a collaborative approach, and we'll see how it goes. I think as we speak at the end of April, we're at about 3 million downloads. So we'll get there eventually. But it's an interesting when it comes to trust, safety, and confidence in government online programs. So we're coming towards the end of our webinar. I'm just going to ask each of the three speakers to just give a final few comments based on their presentation, based on the questions we've had. Unfortunately, we haven't got to every question, but some have been similar, so I think the panelists have answered them. Noor, you're first in the rack.
It's very important, to provide, security for your organization. Like what? As many organizations already have, moved to work from home, cyber attackers already expanded in their, advanced persistent threats. And this already increases the vulnerabilities for our home networks and also exposed the organization assets, because we usually deal with the organization and we need to protect the organization assets like files, also software and all of this stuff. So this is actually the time to develop, well-designed security protocols and standards and policies. This is like the corporate governance and also offering operational security plan in your organization. This will achieve safeguarding your home networks against the new type of cyber attacks, such as scams and phishing, as Monica already described this in details, and we can link this with the habits as GD mentioned. So from this webinar, we can help employees to understand what are the practical insights of security-based home, such as what is the meaning of cyber attacks, cyber defenses, what are the technical practice of security-based home, because it will enrich the employees' knowledge for protecting their home networks and secure the organization assets. And by this way, we will provide more security and defense, and AI also very important to consider these days. Why? Because we deal with large scale network, and this network generate huge amount of data. And as human, we can't handle such data. So artificial intelligence, it will be like the new trend, and not only the new trend, it already exists, to offer inference tools that can help users and work and align with user. This is named human in the loop, and Monica can provide more information about that, how we can use AI to offer security and privacy with considering the human.
No, all great points, and yeah, we as I like to say, we live in quicksilver times, and your research is at the vanguard of everything we're living now, and this will be the new normal. So I look forward to seeing the rest of your thoughts in due course as we tease them out, Noor. JD, some concluding remarks, perhaps?
I just think to reiterate the importance of habit, how profound it is, and think about the cue, routine, reward. And quick points on that. What you're really aiming for is to getting better routines in place. And to do that, you need to look at your cues. The cues are precisely about that relationship between the human and technology here. And you need to think about how you're setting up your workforce in relationship to that technology now in a new environment. So there's new different, home computing, new software, and a new environment in which your workforce is taking place. And I think the key thing there is to marry that with what would the rewards look like. And we will look at some of these things in Prof Ed courses. And as Monica said, that I love the answer to the tracking, tracing COVID-19 app from Monica. And I think, one of the things is about trust and about getting your staff to realize they can trust in these technologies. They can trust that they're doing the right routines. And I think you need to embed that in, and it needs to be repetitive. And at the same time, then, to get those routines locked down, listen to your staff as they adapt. As you say, it's just quicksilver times, things are changing. It does take time. And with any habit change, there are going to be moments where suddenly something hits you. And suddenly month one, month two, certain attritions of the kind of cognitive, behavioral, and emotional states that people are in. Keep up with your staff to marry those cues and trust that you're listening, because those are also the rewards.
Thank you. Great thoughts. Monica.
Thank you. And gosh, I just loved hearing Nora and JD talk about those issues and everything. I guess to conclude from me, looking at cybersecurity is a multidisciplinary problem. And that's what we do at University of New South Wales, is we look at that. And how we move forward. Well, one of the things that we're doing together collectively with these experts that you've heard today and others is that we're developing professional education courses. And they're based on this science of looking at understanding a problem, understanding individual differences, developing things in chunks, repetition, as JD said. You think about our kids learning. They don't just learn it once. We all have to learn in the same kind of way, right? And so I guess to conclude, we need to look at the science and the human aspects and the intersection of those in order to develop that training. And we're here to help you do that. And we also understand that organizations do this in different ways, right? Sometimes VPNing is not useful for an organization because it makes productivity really low. So understanding where are the gives and pulls with all this as well. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So I'm going to wrap it up now. I'm going to likely first thank our three speakers. That was awesome. I learned a lot today, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope everyone that's dialed in has as well. This will be, or has been recorded, and will be made available for use later on. We'll also be teasing out other educational opportunities from this, which will be made available, and we'll advertise on our website, newsletter, and other social medias. I'd also like to thank those behind the scenes. These sorts of things do not come together quickly without great collaboration. And at UNSW Canberra, we work really well as a great team. So a massive big thanks to the UNSW Canberra events team, to the creative media unit, and of course, my great folk, the cyber staff, the professional staff, and the academics. Couldn't have been put together without you. Big thanks from me. So have a great day.